when Serge died, I did 100 days of gratefulness on my Instagram. And that was followed by a lot of people. People loved that. And it pushed me in that sort of that first sort of 6 months of just crapness when you lose someone and you realise they're not coming back. That, you know, it gave me an anchor. I think that's a really nice way to look at the grateful journals, and is just it gives you an anchor in a stormy sea.
In this episode, I've invited a very special guest who couldn't have come at a more appropriate time given the challenges we've all faced in 2020. It's an absolute pleasure to interview Bree Cleal from Image Effect. Bree shares with us how she was able to deal with the challenge of losing her dear husband Serge so young, and how she managed to balance the demands of being a mother, carer to her husband, and being a business owner with a positive and resilient attitude. I hope you enjoy. So Bree, how are you doing firstly?
I'm good. I'm sitting in my home studio and I can hear the cockies outside screeching. So while you might be listening to Tai Chi, I've got bird life outside. So
both calming. Nice. Both calming.
No? Yeah, I'm very well, thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So just for the listeners, maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I'm a businesswoman and have been for a long time. I'm a graphic designer. I'm a mum and a very busy all-rounder single parent and a widow. So the latter was not part of life's plan originally, but I kind of rolled with it. I run a little studio called Image Effect, which specialises in logo and branding for small to medium-sized businesses, particularly brand storytelling. So working out what it is that a business does and that makes them special, that makes them unique, and wrapping that up in content. It could be copy, it could be graphics, it could be online presence that represents them in a way that makes them stand out from the rest of the minions around. So yeah, that's kind of me.
And full disclosure that you've been working with me on my graphic design stuff for my business for quite a while as well. So and helping us develop the It's Never About Money landing page and developing all that as well. So that's your creative input. And I'm very apologetic when I come back to you and I sort of say, could we have a little bit of a change here or a change there? I feel like I'm your worst client.
Not at all, Joe. That's part and parcel of being a graphic designer. And one of the things that I think makes a graphic designer work well with people is the ability to listen and not to sort of go off and do what you think they need. There's got to be a little bit of that, but it's about collaboratively working with people to understand and listen to their ideas as much as you have your own ideas.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. Please don't ever feel like that. Yes, I have. And, see, this podcast that you're doing is a fantastic way that you are differentiating yourself as a financial planning business, because the content of it, and I'm really looking forward to what we talk about today, is kind of a little bit outside of the scope of what we would classify as a traditional financial planning practice. So it's a point of difference. It sets you apart. So this is what I'm talking about this is part of your whole brand story.
Yeah, well, yeah, I agree. And I suppose, it's interesting that, on the surface of it, that's true. When you stereotype financial advisors, you don't necessarily always see the fact that we're the, custodians of wealth and try to help our clients manage their lives, and we get entrusted with a lot of information. And through my dealings with clients, there was just so many amazing conversations and stories. It just needs to be shared, and definitely yours is one of them. But I just wondered, because look at the background there; it's just fantastic. I think it's the most phenomenal background I've had so far in the interviews. So you're very creative. Does that come innately? Is that something that just is in you? Is that why you've got longevity for being a graphic designer and love your business? Is that part of it, being creative?
Yeah, definitely. I grew up in a very creative family. So, interestingly, you know, a lot of people who come into graphic design when I did in the 90s, the sort of late 90s, I won't age myself too much, didn't necessarily have the support of their family because their family didn't understand what graphic design was, whereas I grew up with a grandmother who was a ticket writer in the 50s and 60s in Melbourne. So she worked with a lot of fashion brands like Sports Girl, and she used to paint these beautiful signs that were for the window displays. And I actually have some of them framed now because she kept them. They're awesome. So I grew up with her. She lived with us till I was 15. So she was always in this creative space, and she worked till she was 70, still hand lettering signage for people.
Oh, so that's why you. That's a beautiful thing. I mean, you've been doing hand lettering as well, and it feels like it might almost be like a pass on from the generations. It's great.
Absolutely. And I miss her very much. I was very close to my grandma. So her brother was what was called a commercial artist, which in those days was a graphic designer. So when Mum and Dad realised I liked drawing and I really loved being creative, they harnessed that and built a little studio in our garage, and I used to make my own paper, and I'd silk paint, and I'd draw, and my whole teenage years were filled with creativity. So I was very lucky like that. And yes, I think being creative, whether it's the way you choose to dress, the way you choose to decorate a room, music for me, singing, playing the guitar, sharing my story in a way that touches people emotionally is a creative exercise, just like playing a song and touching people emotionally that way is. So, yeah, I think that's just who I am. And I don't think, a lot of people say to themselves, oh, what am I going to do on the weekend? I'm going to be bored. I'm going to be bored.
Not happening, right?
Yeah. I've always got something to do. There's so many ways to be creative in life, gardening, all sorts of things.
Yeah, for sure. And do you ever feel like, though, you spread yourself, like creative people, it's just enjoying the creativity in and of itself that is the important thing for a lot of creative people, so it doesn't matter what the thing is, so long as you're kind of being creative in a way. Do you ever feel like you spread yourself too far and there's too many things that you're doing, or is it just like, it's just enjoyable just so long as I'm creating?
Sometimes I do feel like that, Joe. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I have to be careful because when you're a creative person and already in one area of my life, my creativity has become work. So that's a different type of creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And a few years ago when I got very busy with music, that stopped being fun because it was, I have to be at this gig on Saturday night, I have to go to this festival, I have to be there at this time, there's a sound check at that time, and the whole experience is just completely eroded in that sort of scenario, rather than if you're just sitting in your lounge room playing music and just feeling really good about what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I think it's really careful that in all parts of your life, you kind of keep something that belongs to you.
Yeah, for sure. It's like the creative process really reminds you of that inner child. It really reminds you of the days when you were young and you didn't have these other sort of complicating factors around. So, you talk about like the music all of a sudden started to feel a little bit more businessy because you had to sort of think about this and that, and it kind of spoiled it for you. Do you ever feel that way as well about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the thing. And, when I started playing the guitar originally, I've sung all my life. My father was and is a pianist. So as soon as he knew I could sing, therefore I got plopped up. Come on, Bree, sing us a song. And I was always really frightened of singing. And then once you got me up there, you couldn't get me down. So that was really great to have that with him, and I still sing with him sometimes. But when I picked up the guitar, I picked it up at a really hard time in my life. My husband was really sick, and I thought, I need to find something that takes me away from this everyday crapness that life had become in my personal existence. So I thought, well, I need to accompany myself. I've got to learn how to do this. So within a few short months, I was playing easy peasy country songs, which are 3 chords and off we go. And I loved that. And I really, without getting too esoteric. I really do feel that there's a connection to a higher being when you sing and play music. You're really in it. And that is what kept me in it. And when it becomes work, that feeling, that intimate feeling that you have with the universe or God or however you want to put it is gone.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, you can see the three guitars back there. You know, whenever I get the guitar out and I'm just trying to create a song or just trying to, you know, create some sort of a melody, I could spend like a whole day doing it, and time and space is irrelevant. I've just in this sort of warp zone, and it's the most fun and most sort of, you know, spiritual I feel often. And sometimes I'll be listening to music and you know, I'd had some challenges and some other issues in my life, and then all of a sudden it's almost like the music can unlock those things better than in some ways, you know, talking to someone would. I don't
Totally. You're so in the moment.
Yep.
So in the moment. You've got a drum behind there too, Joe.
Yeah. Oh, well, that just actually is a kind of like way that I kind of show off my Egyptian heritage. I've got the Egyptian tabla, and then you can see the pharaonic sort of like papyrus paper paintings. My cousin in Egypt actually is an artist and draws on traditional papyrus. You actually have to see it. I haven't shown you that before, but yeah, it's
beautiful.
It's proud of my heritage, so that's part of the backdrop.
So drumming circles, do you ever go to drumming circles?
I don't even know what a drumming circle is, Bree, so
it's where a number of people come together with a drum, very much like that one that you've got, and they just beat the drum together in the forest or some kind of place, and then all this wonderful energy. And if you've been to, I mean, I've in my years been to quite a few sort of fairly alternative festivals, and you know, there's people drumming, and the energy that they create is amazing.
Well, something I should think about.
Yeah.
You've given me a few handy tips over the years. Yeah. I'll look into that one. It's probably a little bit more obscure than I'm used to, but that's okay. So you mentioned your late husband, and you mentioned, you know, putting in some, you know, getting music into your life, I suppose, to deal with some of the challenges. Maybe you'd like to share with the listeners a little bit about your personal story, which I think really epitomizes sort of resilience and positivity. And if you would like to start back in 2009 and go from there.
Yeah, so in 2009, we got a very big shock, and my husband was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And it was interesting because it wasn't like he had normal symptoms. He didn't have headaches, which are kind of a normal symptom of someone with a brain tumor. He had what were called absent seizures. So he would be talking to me, and then he'd kind of just check out for 30 seconds, and he wasn't there anymore. And then his face would change colour, and I remember saying, well, they're funny turns. You better go and get those checked. And he sort of didn't want to. He was busy with work. And eventually, the GP thought he had gastro. So, it was crazy. Yeah. And then we ended up at this specialist GP who found the brain tumour. And I walked into the waiting room, and it's never a good sign. I dropped Serge off at the appointment early because I had to find a car parking spot. He ran in. I walked in with my little then 4-year-old daughter holding my hand, and the doctor was walking around the waiting room waiting for me, and he was saying, "Are you Mrs. Sapochnikov?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am." And we went into this room, and I don't think it's ever a good sign when a doctor is waiting for you in the waiting room. And he put the scans up and said, "Your husband's got a brain tumor." And I immediately said, "No, he doesn't. You've got the wrong scans." So complete denial. That day I remember vividly, because it was the only time that as a family we actually ate McDonald's. The only time ever. So that, you know, we're a very sort of healthy, organic kind of family, and to eat McDonald's was really an indicator of how crap that day was for us.
That was a comfort food to the greatest extent, right?
Yeah. So, so from 2009 to 2017, I lived this roller coaster of, you know, neurosurgeries, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, trial drugs. And I also became, which I never really foresaw, that the main breadwinner, the breadwinner, because my husband really didn't go back to work. So we made the decision that he should really concentrate on his health. Rightly or wrongly, that was the decision we made. I think it put a lot of pressure on me, but you do what you do at the time. And we should all know that we make decisions at a time. They're not always going to be the right decisions, but they're something that we have to kind of roll through. So that was the decision that we made.
Must have been quite traumatizing, you know, getting the announcement at the time. And I know from personal experience that, you know, not all, but some doctors use a bit of a sledgehammer approach to announcing certain things like that. And especially as a sensitive person, probably never even thinking about it, that must have been a complete traumatic event for you.
It was awful. It was horrible. And then unfortunately, he had some medical issues after the first neurosurgery. He got a pulmonary embolus, which is a blood clot in your lungs. So they were very worried about that. And I argued with sledgehammer-like medical professionals in emergency with him over the fact that they wanted to put him on blood thinners 3 days out of neurosurgery. And I said, no, you can't do that. That's stupid. Like, the logic to me was like, he's just had his brain operated on. If you give him blood thinners and he bleeds, he'll have a stroke. What are you doing? I'm not letting you do this until you have the neurosurgery doctors in this room. And I mean, this was a Saturday night in emergency. I was probably 34, very little experience, but I just common sense. So I advocated and argued, and I remember just this nurse was furious with me for not getting out of the way when she wanted to put this blood thinner into him. And
so you physically got in. You physically got in.
I physically got in the way. I said, "You're not doing this. Until I see a neurosurgery doctor, you are not doing this." I remember the neurosurgeon, I should say, walking into the room, and he split the curtains, and he was all in his scrubs, and he said, "Everyone out! This patient is mine." And I remember going, oh, yes.
It sounds like a British comedy or something.
Oh, it was just full on. And, you know, there were bloody motorbike accidents and people dying in the next cubicle. And
wow.
It was just horrific. So I don't do particularly well in hospitals anymore. But I know that they're there for a reason, and I'm not in any way denigrating the medical profession. They do an amazing job, but I do think that there are certain times when you do have to advocate, and that was probably the start of me growing up. Because Go.
Yeah, I was just saying, it's like it's just you know, astounding to me. And again, I'm not denigrating the medical profession as well, but that you were the one that actually sort of had to, you know, make that call, and the logic absolutely makes sense, right? And you know, again, personal experience tells me that my mother, when my late father was going through these things, would often research everything herself and double check and ask so many questions and badger the medical professions, and often it would make there would be a change in the direction as a result of that. And I often wondered, I mean, this is my mother, who hasn't got a medical background, but cares so much and does the due diligence, that, you know, it actually does make a difference. So obviously this is an experience that you felt very much so as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to research it. And what's wonderful is when you get medical professionals who are prepared to collaborate, and, you know, you find your way there. But certainly I had to really, when my husband was diagnosed, I had to really grow up on a number of levels, because I always had this idea that my husband would behave the way my father had, which was look after everyone, be the main breadwinner. My mother always worked, but be the main breadwinner, take us on nice holidays. All the things I grew up with, I realised, well, they were completely shattered on that diagnosis. And I describe it as having to put my big girl pants on. But I didn't necessarily get there straight away. We don't you know, you don't all of a sudden get a diagnosis like that and the next day go, oh, I better put my big girl pants on, you know.
No, but you, I suppose you got to a point where you've now reflected, and you now reflect on this, and you talk of you know, a conscious resilience. Now, prior to that conscious resilience, what was the worst time, and how did it manifest? Like, you know, when you reflect on when you were at your worst before this kind of sort of situation comes where you go, well, I've actually got to just control the controllables now and put one foot in front of the other. What was the worst time for you?
In regards to my husband's diagnosis, that period of time. So after he had the pulmonary embolus, he kind of lost trust in the medical profession completely, and decided not to have any treatment in the first year. So they were saying, we think you need to have radiotherapy. He basically said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go and meditate in the forest and go to the Gawler Institute, and I'm going to be a vegan, and I'm going to do all this for a year. And I remember thinking, you know, so this is really serious. This is not something that you stuff around with. You really should probably do what the doctors say. So we argued at the time a lot about that, because I had a lot of trouble understanding why you wouldn't do what the doctors were saying. And I got myself into a real tiz over that. Like, I was really a bit of a mess trying to get him to do something that I wanted. And I remember going to sleep one night and I was so anxious. You know, I was devastated in a way that he wouldn't do what I wanted him to do, because I felt like it was a bit uncaring. But at the same time, you know, the spiritual work that I'd done before that helped me understand that I don't own somebody and I don't own their decisions. You know, there is a level of detachment that we all must have in life from everything and everyone, because we come in on our own and we go out on our own. And I kind of had to let him have that space, but I went to bed that night in an anxiety bubble, and I woke up in the morning and it was like somebody had gone into my head and twisted my brain around and thrown out all the anxiety. And I remember just feeling incredible peace and just this idea of detachment, where I was like, I don't control you. I'm your wife, but I don't control the decisions that you ultimately make about who you are as a person and how you want to live your life. Because I've always got a choice in that to say, well, that doesn't suit me, I'm out of here. You know, I didn't do that. I sort of looked at it and went, okay, this person I love, and I'm going to support this journey until I can't support it anymore. And I'm going to let go. I'm just going to let go, because it's hurting me to try to control something that is out of my control. None of us can control those sorts of things.
And I imagine it not just hurts you, but it also hurts the other who actually wants to do what they want to do too.
Yeah.
So you're giving him a precious gift by actually, you know, honoring his wishes, I suppose,
absolutely.
in a challenging and difficult way, nonetheless.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that decision, although he needed to do it, didn't work, and he ended up back in hospital within a year, much, much worse than he was initially. And so then it was kind of like, okay, I'm on the hospital train now. I'm going to do whatever I need to do. So there's a letting go. There's a looking at, this is the situation that I'm in. I can either choose to walk, which some people do in a marriage after a diagnosis. They can't cope with it. This isn't how it was meant to work out. Stuff you, I'm out of here. I could never do that to someone. And it's looking at, I've got a daughter who's at school, just started prep at school. I need to be here. I need to be a mum. I need to keep the home fires burning. I need to work, and I need to focus on what I can control. And what I could control was myself.
And how was, I mean, yeah, 100%. And how was managing all of those things at that particular point in time? That must have been harrowing, being a business owner, dealing with clients, their world, and in their world, you know, you designing their collateral for their business is everything. And at your point, you know, what's everything is the health of Serge and looking after your family. So how did you, that's an extraordinary burden. How did you deal with that?
I just put it aside. I boxed it and I put the lid on it and I put it on a shelf and I went to work. Because this is what I talk about with conscious resilience. You make a choice. You always have choices, and they might be very hard to see in certain times in your life, depending on what's going on. You know, I remember discussing this with my mum when I first did my talk, and I talked about that we all have choices. And she said, well, some people don't have choices. They don't have choices, Bree. That's a very simplistic way to look at things. And I said, well, I don't agree with that, because I think we do. And our choice might simply be to get up in the morning and write down 3 things that we're grateful for. That might help us to get through the day. So I did, I boxed what I could box, which was my husband's experience. He was on this road. This was his experience. My experience was, I'm making a choice here to get up in the morning, to look at the things that I'm grateful for, to look at my daughter who was very healthy. I'm very grateful for her, to think about the fact that we lived in a beautiful area, to look at the trees, to go for a walk, to breathe, to be with friends, to ask for help when I need it. They were all choices that I made, because the other choice to me was, I'm going to sit in the corner and I'm going to rock and everything will fall apart.
I suppose we have, you know, in some ways we have no choice in being delivered a trauma that like you had been delivered, but we have a choice in the way we, I suppose, view that traumatic event and what we decide to do going forward. And I remember a book that I read was The Courage to be Disliked. And it talked about the Adlerian viewpoint of psychology, which is really about not looking at the past as an indication of the future, but looking at the past as a way of being able to learn and go forward and move in potentially a positive direction. There are, you know, I think, you know, and this is what the book was advocating, that if you decide that you don't want to do something based upon fear, it's an actual active choice. It's not relating to the trauma, because there is other decisions that you can make as well. So I think that's what you're kind of advocating for.
Definitely. That's a great book. I must look at that, Joe.
Yeah. I can't remember the author, but it is, you know, an amazing book, and it helped me process a number of things. One of the concepts that I kept thinking about during some of my most challenging times was this idea that, you know, most people see their lives as kind of like a line with a certain trajectory. So if you look back on that line, you can sort of see what the trajectory is going forward. But if you actually narrow in on that line, you can see that the actual line is a series of dots and they're not connected. So every day is a new day for you, and you can change your stripes. And I'm hearing that loud and clear with what you're sort of suggesting to me. So I imagine though, like, you know, for you that, it would be easy to have looked at the glass and thought, well, it's pretty empty at the moment. How did you, to be blunt, how did you ensure that you didn't fall into that trap?
But I did fall into those traps.
Sure.
You know,
sure.
I don't think that we, as you said, every day is a new day. So one day, I mean, when someone has a brain tumor, and brain cancer it's a very difficult disease. They know very little about it at this point in time in comparison to other cancers. And yet it's the biggest killer of people under 40 out of all of the cancers. And not only does it kill people, but it changes them. So personalities are changing. And I lived in this bubble of brain cancer for over 7 years, 7.5 years it was. And every 3 months, my husband would have a check. So every 3 months, I had to go back into that hospital with him and sit with him and get the MRI results. Now, out of all those 3-month periods in that 7.5 years, most of the results were positive, and then there were some that weren't, and that resulted in another 4 surgeries. And each time there was a surgery, they would what they call debulk the tumour, but they take the positive. They take good cells as well as bad cells, and it's a brain. So he lost his peripheral vision, and his personality changed over time. I mean, little things like, and I only realised this, you know, so far down the track. I mean, we're a decade down the track now, but, you know, he would unpack the dishwasher after I'd packed it because he wanted it packed a particular way. Now, that sort of behaviour, I at the time thought, oh, that's just Serge, but really it was probably what I call tumour talk. So there were lots of changes that he had. So there were many days when I kind of looked at this and went, well, this is so bad. Like, what am I going to do?
For sure.
But it's conscious. It's just that conscious resilience. What am I going to do? I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm going to do what I can control. And what I could control was work. So work was a real saving grace, to be honest.
Yeah.
I worked all the time.
So I suppose as part of the resilience package, one part of it would be developing routines, I imagine.
Yep.
And how important were routines in your capacity to stay positive and resilient?
I'm afraid that I've got to be transparent here.
That's what we want here, right? So you don't have to be the master of routines if you're not.
Routines are really good in theory, and I think I have routines for a period of time, and then they kind of fall away depending on what else is happening. So I would often find, today or for this period of time, I'm going to be doing yoga every day, and that would last for sort of 6 months, and then I'd kind of fall off the wagon. Or I would find another routine, which was dropping my daughter off at school, going for a walk for an hour, then coming home and starting work. I think that was really important. Just exercise in whatever form you can find it, but it's not. I love the idea of thinking that I'm a really great yogi, but the reality is, I don't stick to it.
What about just the sheer ability to just front up to your clients on a day-by-day basis and to work?
Yeah, so that's a routine, and that didn't budge. Yeah. The self-care stuff probably budged a bit, as it does in everyone's life. I mean, that's
for sure.
I'm always struggling with. But, my routine for work was very clear. And there were things that I did over that period of time that sometimes needed to take me out of home. I travelled interstate with work. I worked in co-working spaces in St Kilda to stay social, to meet people. I joined networking groups that got me out. I did things that I knew I needed to do to get where I needed to get. And no one told me to do that. That was just something that I kind of would work out in my own head and just do it. So I never, I've always had a home studio. That was something I made a decision to have when my daughter was born. But if there was washing that needed to be done, I didn't do it. If there was a kitchen that needed to be cleaned, I didn't do it. If a child needed to be looked after, my husband did it. I worked and I shut the door, and that was that.
And in a way, that was a way of obviously helping from a financial perspective, but it was also a way of getting you moving and distracting you from other things, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a saving grace work. And I built my business up during that time. I never, ever thought that I would be able to support what ended up being a family of 4, for a long period of time. So, but you just, it's weird. As I said, you put one foot in front of the other. You just keep putting one foot in front of the other.
Yeah. And
you trust. You think this is going to be okay.
Do you think you're tough, Bree? Do you feel like it's toughness that got you through? Is that what resilience is about? Being tough?
I think that word tough evokes images of muscles and, like power. I don't know. I think there's an inner strength in making a conscious choice to be resilient. And it shows, a stable foundation of self in that. I wouldn't ever put myself in being as a characteristic tough. I would say I'm pretty strong. My music partner that I had used to say I was a marshmallow on the outside and tough as nails on the inside. And she used to laugh at me because we'd be playing gigs and I remember singing a really beautiful country ballad, and this man in the front row had this incredible coughing fit in the middle of my song, like a huge hacking coughing fit. And he was one of those real hillbilly, scary, looked like a biker kind of a guy. And I sang the song, and at the end of it, I made this crack at him and said, you know, it's polite to leave the room when you do that, you know, when someone's singing so beautifully. But everyone laughed. And as my musical partner said to me afterwards, he didn't actually know he was being told off, because you do it in such a nice way that no one actually realised it. So yeah, there's definitely a strength and a courage. I think the word courage is a really good word. I don't know whether you're familiar with Brene Brown. She talks a lot about courage.
Yeah.
I was listening to one of her podcasts yesterday that she had Dolly Parton on, and she talked about, at the end of it, she said, let's all keep being courageous, awkward and real, or something along those lines. I don't know that I've got the third word right, but definitely I think I'm courageous. I will give myself that.
Well, you know, I know that you've talked to me about the fact that, you know, you actually need in being resilient, you actually need to be vulnerable. In some ways, and there's a courage in being vulnerable, and I suppose there's a toughness in being vulnerable, but they don't seem to be put together. So, could you perhaps, you know, give us a bit of an insight as to how you were vulnerable and how that impacted you positively?
These questions are curvy for a Thursday morning.
They are. But I mean, I'm kind of thinking more along the lines of, you know, you weren't someone that sat there stoically and saying, I don't need help as an example.
No.
So, you know, the value of having a community and the support aspect of that is something that I see as being the vulnerability side of it. And so could you perhaps maybe chat about that?
I think when you're being vulnerable, there is an honesty and an authenticity when we're vulnerable. And I think I was open with my clients when I needed to be. So I was very open with my clients at the end of life with my husband. I let them know that things were really tough. I was doing my best. This is the situation. I kept up communication. But also, there were many days when I just, certainly after test results, where I would kind of fall apart, and I would just call people and I would talk to them. I think the other thing was I always had a therapist.
Yep.
I think that is completely underrated. I think we all need a therapist at some point in our lives.
Seemingly in the US, they seem to be a little bit more vocal about the fact that they actually have a therapist. And in Australia, it seems to be this kind of like, there's a little bit of, I think it's getting better, but there's a little bit of the shame associated with going to see someone if you need help. And I don't think that's not helpful in any way.
No, it's not. Because we take our cars in to be serviced every 6 months. So we should really take ourselves in to be serviced every month if that's what we need to do, if not more. So I would have people that I could really let fly with, which was obviously a therapist. But then also I had a selection of very good friends. So I had a circle of probably 3 or 4 friends that knew what was going on. What I found difficult in my vulnerability or my feelings of worry, which I often had, and wanting to talk to people about them, was that my husband was the complete opposite. So he didn't want to talk to anyone about his illness. In fact, if anyone brought it up in a social situation, he would walk away. Whereas some people with cancer will talk about their results, they'll talk about their treatments. He would just completely shut down and wouldn't talk about it at all. So that was his way of dealing with being vulnerable. My way of dealing with being vulnerable was to actually talk about it. So I had these people to chat to, some of which were with me all the way through that journey, and one of which organised the entire funeral with me. So, they were people that, there were lots of times, like I would just, on a weekend that had been really tough, I would go over and I would be injected with gin at someone's house.
Perfect. That's exactly what you need sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, look, everyone has their own way of dealing with vulnerability. I think it takes courage to say, I'm having a crap day. I'm really struggling at the moment and I need help. And I think that is a better way to deal with it than shutting it all down emotionally.
So you had friends and family, obviously, that were unbelievably supportive and came out of the woodwork. Probably, I imagine some that were probably were a bit of a surprise packet to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I did. And I've always had lovely friends, but they really stepped up over that period of time. And I'm just a big believer in life that you give what you get. So it's really important. I always try to help people myself. I always try to give as much as I can to people who are in need or who need help or just need someone to talk to. There's been several women with husbands who've been diagnosed with brain cancer that I've had sitting on my couch at home, just talking to them about it. I'm hoping that in my public speaking that I hope to do more of next year when we're hopefully out of COVID, that enables me to empower other people and with this idea of being consciously resilient. So I think in life we must give to get.
Yes, for sure. And I know that, you know, the actual, the one thing that, well, there's been a number of things that have been a stabilizing influence in your life, but the business has been there right through. And when I think about the idea of the value of community and support and being vulnerable, you sought out a business coach during that time. So, you know, give us a bit of an insight as to what that helped you to do, particularly when there was a lot of obviously uncertainty with respect to your capacity to serve your clients. When I suppose Serge was at his worst.
Yeah. So I got a business coach probably not long after sort of the first year of his diagnosis. So once after that first year of not having any treatment, he went right downhill and lost all his motor skills and then fell into a coma. And by the time I finally got him into hospital, and I called a friend of ours who's a physio, and he came over and helped me get him into the car and get him up and into hospital. I should have just called an ambulance, but, you know, again, you do what you do. Yeah. So I realised then that things could go downhill quickly and unexpectedly with this type of illness. I didn't know. This is what's so hard with life, is there's so many unknowns. We don't really know what will happen. I couldn't put a pin in the sand and say, this is when Serge is going to die, so I'm working towards this date. I had no idea. I mean, the doctors were saying 2 to 3 years. We were 7 to 8 years. So he did really well for that period of time. You know, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Joe, give me a minute.
That's okay.
No, you were talking about business coaches. So I got a business coach and we worked on my business, and having that person there gave me confidence in my abilities, and gave me some routines that we talked about earlier. Yeah. And also I had a lot of template documents in regards to Serge's health, in how I would communicate with my clients. I had templates for if he went to hospital. I had templates for if he went into palliative care. I had templates for if he died, and they would just be fired out to clients, because I thought to myself, I can't necessarily solve all of these things for my clients and fix everything up and make it all go away for them, but I can communicate with them.
So you basically procedurized your business in a way to hug your life, rather than just sort of, I suppose it would be completely forgivable if you just gone, it's too hard, and just buried your head in the sand a little bit about it. But you actually planned, you put something in place to ensure that in most eventualities you had some sort of contingency, some sort of ability to liaise with your clients through the period.
Yeah, I did. And so those things came into play, absolutely. At end of life, that all came into play.
Mm-hmm.
I also had a contractor.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't do it all myself.
Mm-hmm.
I had to have somebody else in play that was going to help me when I couldn't work. So that those sorts of things the business coach helped me work out.
Mm-hmm.
And she's still a business coach that I work with today. It's like a therapist. We have to have these certain people in our lives that we pay to help us
Yeah, for sure.
live our best life.
For sure. I suppose in some ways, business owners are can be really shocked when life events don't turn out the way they want, because, you know, as a business owner, you've got this kind of in some ways, you've got this sort of like strategic plan and this roadmap, and you control the controllables at all time. And then when a life event occurs, it just kind of sends you into a snap, because you can't apply business principles all the time to life.
No, you can't. And none of us know how our lives are going to roll out.
No.
It's all unknown. So
True.
we take one day at a time and we do our best.
True. Now, there was there ever a time when the pursuit of, financials for financial sake alone became just too much to handle, and you kind of had enough? Is there any aspect of, pursuing profitability for profitability's sake itself, where it's just, it just didn't help you at all? Does anything come to mind?
No, because I was always really clear about spending time with my daughter and my husband when I could. And there were lots of times when I had to work on the weekend. There was a period of time when I had 60% of my work was given to one client, and then all of a sudden they wanted to employ me full time. And
would that have been financially beneficial?
In the short term, yes.
Yes.
In the short term. So that was really hard, because I ended up walking away from that client and the 60% and cut my business down considerably and had to rebuild it up again. So luckily I had savings. My husband was Russian, and unless you have cash, you don't have it. You have to have the cash. So that was how we existed. So we didn't carry big debt.
Yes.
And I think that there's a point in life where you have to accept, who cares if I'm driving the latest Mercedes? Who gives a crap? As long as I've got a car that gets me from A to B, as long as I can live a life and go out to dinner with my friends or go on a traveling if I want to, isn't that enough? Why do I have to create this massive wealth pyramid? I just don't. Pyramid's not the right word.
Don't use pyramid. I'm Egyptian,
No.
Bree. Let's not desecrate the ancient pyramids.
I backtracked. But this wealth mountain, which ends up just being a big stress sometimes, controlling it.
That makes sense. So I suppose like the podcast name, It's Never About Money, which I gave you the brief on, completely resonates with you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I don't think it is. Because I don't think money makes you happy.
No,
it doesn't. Ultimately, it can make you comfortable, and it can give you some choices.
Yeah, for sure.
But it doesn't necessarily make you happy. And we never wanted to live that way. So, I felt very confident walking away from that client, even though it meant a drop in financial security short term, because I knew I'd build it up again. I just trusted myself, and I worked. And I worked with people who could help me get to the next stage. So that's where your business coach comes in again.
Yep.
Yeah. But COVID's been a really classic example of watching people who would appear to have enormous wealth just topple down, because it's all debt.
Yep, 100%. What are you, just dovetailing off into health, which I think is a big theme of the podcast, and reflecting on Serge's life and what sort of impact do you think it's had on the way you view health nowadays? Do you think it has had an impact at all on the way you look at your own health and other people?
I think it looks, to be honest, I probably get panicky because of the experience I went through with Serge. You know, if there's something up with me, I kind of go, oh my God, you know, I could, because what happened to him was so unexpected. I mean, he was Mr. Health, Mr. Meditator, Mr. Organic, and all of a sudden he's got cancer. What? So I think I struggle a little bit with that in myself. And I have to, I make conscious decisions to look after myself because of that. So again, it's the therapist, it's eating well, it's exercising, doing things that I love. So, you know, life is not all about work and money, like we've talked about. You've got to kind of look at life holistically, and I look at health the same way. So if there's something that feels a little bit broken, I make it a call to action and I do something about it. And as I said, you know, there's certain tools and remedies that I choose to look at. I think health is an undervalued, necessary commodity. You know, we have to have it. And things can change like that very quickly.
Sure.
Health is like paramount.
Yep. And I suppose, you know, like we you know, the issue is, of course, looking at Serge's life, as you said, super healthy guy, did all the right things, and then he had this illness, and there's the risk of you going, well, what's the point, right? And looking after your health, because, but I think in the end, isn't it a way, it's a small sample size, and sometimes you do have outliers and you do have things that happen for whatever reason.
And there's not necessarily any reason.
No.
It's just a cell that went crazy, and that's just how it goes.
Yeah.
But I look at my grandparents who lived till they were 90 or 85, 90, and they smoked. Revolting. So you just go, how on earth did that happen?
Yeah.
How on earth? I don't know. There's so many questions, Joe, so many questions.
There are. But like, do you think in terms of the way you run your business now, it's changed a little bit into now, and your philosophy on business itself, given what you've experienced?
I think I'm a lot more open with my clients now than I used to be. I used to be quite guarded, and I used to try to have this very, very, very professional attitude, which served me well over a period of time when I was perhaps needing to be more like that, or in myself, I felt like I needed to be more like that. I think I'm much more, I feel as though I've become a lot more authentic. Oh,
wow. That's incredible, right? Because I feel very similar things. I don't know if it's age or experience, but, you know, I feel very similar things. Yeah, you probably, again, if you're anything like me, you might have felt really kind of not really disingenuous, but a little bit disingenuous in some ways, like in the sense that you're not actually showing your true colors because you're kind of a bit stuffy and put into a box. And it's once you get out of that and you realize how much people appreciate you being real with them and can connect with you on a different level, I think it's quite amazing, really. It's transformational.
Absolutely. And that's what's really great about when I did my first public speaking event this year. I actually got work out of that. I got several projects out of that, and also introductions into various women's groups and things that wanted me to sit in and listen to them and help them with a few things, and opportunities to write articles in magazines, because I was being myself, because people could see me in that and they wanted to work with that. And that's, I think, the thing that sometimes in business we just forget. We put ourselves behind a sign and a vision of how we see the business, and we forget about all these wonderful traits that we have as human beings. And that natural ability that I have as a graphic designer to listen to people in an initial briefing and really get an idea of what they are. I ask as many questions about, you know, to them and who they are personally and what this business means to them as I do about where they sort of see the business from a financial or a, you know, short-term, long-term kind of space, because we are, you know, nobody is us. We're all unique. What we bring to the table is very special because it's ours. No one else has it. And I think following people as well that do that publicly and do it very well, I think is something that I've gained great inspiration from.
Yep.
People who are authentic to themselves, no matter what.
Yeah. So are you saying that you were a fan of Donald Trump then?
Nine, Nick, no.
No, but I mean, you got to give him some credit. That guy was authentic.
He was, yeah, well, in a really gross way.
Yeah, in a really gross way, right?
It doesn't mean that his authenticity is appealing. I'm probably talking more about, and again, this is when you're in the depths of a great challenge like I was, because for me, it was about finding something to hang on to all the time. I was always looking for that life raft, whether it be a spiritual practice, whether it be talking to a friend, whether it be just sorting my head out, whether it be work, or in some cases, people like Dolly Parton, who I am a massive fan of. And I was a massive fan of hers before she became this kind of cultural icon that she's become in the last sort of 5 years. And I looked at her and I looked at how authentic she is. She doesn't care what anybody thinks. She is who she is, and she is a powerhouse, an absolute powerhouse. Yet she's vulnerable. That's why she writes such beautiful music, because she's prepared to be really sad and sit in it and be in the pain.
Yeah, for sure.
That.
For sure. Yeah. Jolene is a really good example of that. That song is like, there was nothing written about, a woman who is basically asking another woman, please leave my man. Like, there's nothing ever written about that in the past. No, I mean, it's quite vulnerable, isn't it? So
yeah. A lot of her songs were banned actually early on because they dealt with things like suicide. They dealt with women being beaten up. They dealt with teenage pregnancies, hiding babies, all that sort of stuff. This is in the 60s when people didn't talk about those sorts of things.
For sure.
I think she has a quote, and I have it on my business card, which is, find out who you are and do it on purpose. And that just really sits really well with me. That's
awesome. On the sort of advisory front, because obviously, we've been going through our own challenges, through this pandemic and COVID, and you've obviously experienced it as well. Like, do you have any advice to those business owners, families that have struggled through this pandemic and faced significant challenge, and how to mentally cope with the strain of it? And I know the strain is all relative and everyone has different circumstances, but it has been a challenging time for all of us, I think, during this period. So is there anything that you can, any wisdom you can impart to those who are really struggling?
Only to say that, I think it has been an incredibly difficult time for everyone, but just there's been different scales of how difficult it is. My father made a comment to me a few weeks ago, which was, well, it's great that we've supposedly stamped out COVID, but I'm not sitting here with a business that's gone under and my house isn't mortgaged against my business and I haven't lost my house. I'm not one of those people, but there are people out there who are in that situation, and that's a really tough thing. I wouldn't dare to even address how to manage the severity of that from a financial perspective, only to say that what I've already talked about is to control the controllable, to look at what you can be grateful for in life, in your everyday, what it is that you can be grateful for in the midst of this just chaos. Are there people that you can work with, people like yourself, Joe, people like business coaches, therapists who can get you through this? Reach out, talk to people. I think the worst thing anybody can do is shut themselves in a room and just let it take them. And that again is about conscious resilience. I think there was constantly in my back of my mind, and maybe this is what you talk about when you use the word tough, it was this idea that this wasn't going to beat me. I wasn't going to let this rule me. This experience I had with Serge, and on top of that, we also had his daughter come to live with us, which was a very, very challenging time as well. So I wasn't going to let any of it beat me. I refused. I was just like, no.
Yeah. Nope, it's not going to happen.
No. So it's to those to people who are really, really struggling. I hope that imparts something.
Well, I think it certainly does. I mean, if I was to give you a summary as to what we've kind of talked about today, you know, we've talked about conscious resilience, actually making a choice to take positive steps going forward and controlling the controllables. We've talked about support and making sure that we're vulnerable enough to ask out and seek assistance. We've talked about being grateful, and the value of the change in mindset by actually just thinking about, you know, perhaps 3 things a day that we're really grateful for, whether it be on the worst days possible that we're just actually breathing. You know, I think you have talked a lot about, you know, what could be helpful, notwithstanding the fact it's probably unbelievably challenging for some people out there.
No. And it might not be that things are solved in 5 minutes. This is a process.
Yep.
And we're all on this, I know it's a very cliched word, but we're all on our journeys, and we've got to kind of keep putting one foot in front of the other, even if some days are just really, really tough. With the grateful aspect, one of the things that I did was do a grateful journal, which I had beside my bed. And every night before I went to bed, I would write down 3 things I was grateful for. And they didn't have to be big things. They could have been things. I'm really grateful that the light is falling on the wall the way it is. I'm really grateful that I can look out my window and the leaves are changing colour. I'm really grateful that my dog is snoring next to me. You know, they were little things, you know, but they just changed my mindset.
Yep. 110%. If you can be 110%, not possible, but you know, like I say that because I actually do the same thing. I write out what I'm grateful for every day. And sometimes, to be honest, I feel silly because it's just like, I'm not grateful for anything at the moment. I'm so, you know, and then I manage to say something like, oh, well, I'm grateful that I'm able to, you know, get up and have a job. And, you know, I find the things that obviously I am grateful for, but it becomes less challenging as you do it more, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's about looking for things. When Serge died, I did 100 days of gratefulness on my Instagram. And that was followed by a lot of people. People loved that. And it pushed me in that sort of that first sort of 6 months of just crapness when you lose someone and you realize they're not coming back. That, you know, it gave me an anchor. I think that's a really nice way to look at the grateful journals, and is just it gives you an anchor in a stormy sea.
Why, Bree, do you think that you want to share your story? It's quite a personal story. You know, what do you think is the most important thing that people can take out of this?
I want to help other women that particularly are dealing with partners who have cancer. So women mostly who, and in some cases, I mean, I know this story resonates with men too, but one of the things that I noticed when I was going through this with Serge is I would see all of these other women with their partners, and brain cancer does seem to be more verging on the male gender. I in my experience, I don't know quite why that is. But sorry, my computer's just done something weird. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. All good.
It's all right. Sorry, everyone. I'll get back in a minute. No, I won't. There I am. Okay, great. Sorry, Joe.
That's okay.
And I would see these women in there and they looked like they had the same experience as me, but because we were in a waiting room in a hospital, it felt like I couldn't talk to them. And then there were carers groups and things that were available via the hospital, but the the social worker, I felt like, was just looking at us like we were all numbers. We weren't people. And I mean, she knew us for a really long time. And I think almost she got a bit sick of us because, you know, God, you know, you're still here 7.5 years down the track. You're not supposed to be, you know. I never really kind of got her, and I never found
maybe there's a bit of empathy burnout as well from the amount of
absolutely really tough job to do. So I wanted to talk to these women and I never could, and I thought that maybe sharing my story might resonate with some of them. If they felt open to it. And I was the sort of person going through this that if I found a talk like my talk and I was able to watch it, I would have eaten it up with a spoon, because I would have been like, this can help me. This is something that I can implement that can help. So my first priority was the people that were dealing with something similar to me. And so I was hoping to be able to do my talk in hospital spaces, in cancer groups, all that sort of thing. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be cancer that you are dealing with. It could be a marriage breakdown. It could be the loss of someone close to you. It could be like what we've had this year with COVID, which is financial ruin, emotional ruin. I mean, I think things were going to end this year in relationships they probably would have, because the stress that this has put on everybody. And this idea of conscious resilience is much more broader than just talking to women who are dealing with something similar to what I dealt with.
Oh, it completely resonated with me. Your 20-minute talk that I listened to completely resonated with me, and I wonder, if anyone wanted to touch base with you for a public speaking appearance, which I would highly recommend. Obviously, some of the themes we've addressed in this podcast, but nothing beats the actual full blown presentation, which I listened to. So, where would they make contact? How could they make contact? How could they reach out to you?
Yeah, sure. Well, they can. I do have a website that's up at the moment, breecleal.com.au.
Okay.
For my public speaking, and they can also reach me at imageeffect.com.au, which is my design studio. Either way is fine. There are contact details on both those websites.
And is there some hand lettering that has been masterfully popped onto those websites?
Yes, there's a whole hand lettering page on my design studio website, and my and also on the Bree Cleal logo type is hand lettered by me as well. So, I'm always having fun with hand lettering, Joe.
Yeah, I know. It's one of your loves. I know.
But, I haven't launched anything officially for the public speaking yet, but I will. I intend to do that. I really want to help people, because a lot of my friends say, wow, that's amazing, Bree. How did you do that? And I don't think it's a big deal. I just go,
it's definitely a big deal. It's definitely a big deal, Bree.
Yeah.
But what's still to do? What's still to do? What's looking forward? What do you?
Right. Well, I have just recently decided to put another foot in front of the other and sell our family home and move.
Yep.
So that's all happening. I'm going to become a city chick.
Yep.
Which will be good for business, and I think good for me to have a change. So I'm really looking forward to next year from that perspective. I won't have massive gardens to deal with and houses with trees hanging over them, and having to learn to use chainsaws and things like that.
You'll have to use an app that actually mimics the bird sounds going forward. Yeah, I know. That's okay. Or you'll have to listen to Indian miners, which are probably not as nice sounding as I don't know what you've got out there.
Well, I'll be closer because you guys are in Kew. I'm actually in Kew. That's where I'm moving to.
Beautiful. Yeah. Well, there we go. We can catch up for coffee now too. Yay!
Absolutely. I know. Thank gosh.
And business wise too.
I'm going to be keeping on going with Image Effect, obviously my design studio, which ticks along quite happily, focusing primarily on brand storytelling there. So new and existing businesses coming to me with no idea of what they do that is special. and they need to illustrate that, and they need to communicate that to their client base. And then obviously formally launching my public speaking business next year too, which will be awesome.
Very exciting. Very exciting.
So I've got to learn my talk off by heart, Joe. That's what's on the cards.
Oh, well, you'll do it. You'll do it.
I've got to walk around the stage with a microphone and look, very, very professional. Like, well, I've got it all down.
Just take your country music and put it into presentation space. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. Just.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah, just sort of like, take in the spirit of Dolly Parton and
absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a video, if anyone's interested, on my Image Effect website, which is a video of my studio and how I work. And there is a snippet of me playing the guitar in that.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Because that's about being authentic. That's who I am.
It is. And guess what? The podcast music that I've put is also my music, my own music too. So it's another way of just keeping it real.
Yeah, absolutely. And this podcast is your exercise in creativity, is creating something that's authentically you.
Absolutely.
And that's where we're most happy.
Yep, I agree. So what spirit animal would you be, importantly, as a final question? What would be your spirit animal? Like something with a lot of resilience. I
haven't ever been asked this question.
And pretty bright, I imagine, and colourful.
Yeah, that would probably be good too. Well, I think about a king parrot actually, but that's because they come to my deck all the time and they're beautifully coloured. I don't know how resilient they are.
They sing.
They sing. Yeah, I'll be a king parrot. That gives me freedom to travel, spread my wings.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thanks, Bree, for coming on. I super appreciate it. I think there's just going to be so many lessons learnt. I have certainly learnt a lot of lessons from you and your story and your experiences and working with you as well, and knowing you. So, I really appreciate it, and I think the listeners will really appreciate it. So I'm really looking forward to pushing this pod out as soon as I possibly can, because I think there'll be a lot of great feedback.
Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you so much for having me. I really am very grateful.
No worries.
I hope that this one was enjoyable to listen to and there were some moments of value. If you have resonated in any way with the sentiments of this podcast, we would be delighted to direct you to our website, www.itsneveraboutmoney.com.au, for more free resources and education aimed at improving your capacity to make sound financial decisions for the benefit of your family. We wish you every success, however you define it.